The dawn on Veritas 6 always arrived in a strange emerald glow, as if the sun rose through layers of liquid glass instead of atmosphere. The jungle canopy reflected the light upward, bending it into shimmering waves that drifted across the training field where the cadets were assembled. The alien recruits, scaled, feathered, ridged, and long-limbed, stood shoulder to shoulder in tense silence. No one spoke. Every species present understood what it meant when Commander Thalrek called an emergency assembly at sunrise. It meant trouble. It meant danger. It meant another attempt to push the limits of every cadet until one of them finally broke. At the far end of the formation stood Elena Brooks, the only human in this year's Galactic Academy Survival Division. She tightened the straps of her plain training vest and kept her eyes ahead. She knew the other cadets whispered about her, always assuming she was underprepared, fragile, or naive. A few even believed humans survived only through luck and reckless improvisation. She never bothered correcting them. The truth always surfaced sooner or later. Commander Thalrek marched into view with his metallic boots sinking slightly into the damp morning soil. His crest, 8 blue spines fanning from his skull, vibrated with authority as he stopped in front of the assembled group. He did not need to shout. His presence radiated command so intensely that every cadet stiffened into perfect posture. His deep voice echoed across the clearing as he announced the next trial. Cadets, today you will face a creature that embodies fear in every corner of this region. A ripple of unease passed through the group. One cadet with pale silver skin clutched his harness straps, while another shifted her stance, her membranes trembling. Commander Thalrek waited for silence before continuing. Your task is simple. Capture a Vorun beast. The moment he spoke the last word, several cadets gasped. Others stepped back in reflexive horror. A Vorun beast was not merely dangerous. It was legendary for its viciousness. Stories described it as a hulking mass of muscle covered in bone-like plates, capable of tearing through hardened hull panels. Its roar could be heard miles away, and its claws carved trenches in solid stone. Instructors always used the Vorun as an example of what not to confront, especially without heavy equipment. But today, Thalrek's order repeated through the clearing like a rolling thunder. Capture the beast. Bring it back to base. Alive! The aliens began whispering among themselves, afraid to even imagine the task. Commander Thalrek continued as if announcing something entirely routine. You are forbidden to use weapons, drones, chemical lures, stun devices, or kinetic traps. You may not injure the creature. You may only use your environment, your skills, and your initiative. The restrictions landed like heavy stones on every cadet's chest. The Vorun was known for charging at any movement. Without stun rifles or barriers, approaching it felt like suicide. Elena watched the growing panic among her peers. Some stared at the ground, already imagining failure. Others exchanged glances with hardened resignation. She inhaled slowly, letting the jungle's damp scent fill her lungs. She had studied the planet before arrival, memorized behavioral notes of local fauna, and paid close attention to every casual mention of the Vorun from veteran instructors. Fear was appropriate. Blind fear was not. Thalrek's eyes scanned the rows of cadets. When his gaze passed over Elena, his expression shifted almost imperceptibly. He knew her record. He understood exactly how she approached every challenge. Quietly, methodically, and without theatrics. He also knew the unspoken tension among alien recruits who resented the Academy's fascination with human problem-solving. Some believed humans possessed an unfair advantage, a strange, unpredictable instinct that defied conventional tactics. Others dismissed humans entirely, believing Elena would be the first to fall before the Vorun's fury. The commander allowed silence to stretch until every cadet felt the weight of the assignment. Then he raised one hand and activated the timer on his wrist. You have 24 hours. Begin. The holographic marker pulsed above the field, and the cadets scattered at once. Several sprinted toward the jungle border, hoping speed would compensate for panic. Others huddled briefly to discuss strategies based on their species' natural strengths. Elena walked calmly toward the tree line, listening to the distant hum of the ecosystem waking under the emerald sun. She felt no need to rush. She had learned long ago that the jungle never rewarded haste. Commander Thalrek observed her for a few seconds, his spines twitching as if intrigued. Then he turned away and vanished back toward the command post, leaving the cadets to their fate. As Elena stepped into the undergrowth, the world swallowed her in a wave of humid warmth. The canopy above filtered the light into narrow beams that illuminated clouds of drifting pollen. Strange insects buzzed in harmonized patterns. Far in the distance, something massive moved, shaking leaves as large as sails. Several cadets nearby flinched at the sound and immediately altered their course. But Elena paused. She closed her eyes briefly and listened. The sound was wrong. Too heavy, too uneven. A predator like the Vorun never moved so clumsily unless something was affecting it. She opened her eyes again, her expression steady. She suspected something was already unbalanced about this assignment, something the others had not yet noticed. The jungle around her vibrated with life, but beneath the natural sounds lingered a low, nearly imperceptible groan, like metal scraping against stone. It echoed through the ravines ahead. Elena adjusted her pack and pressed forward, feeling the damp moss sink beneath her boots. She did not know yet what condition the Vorun was in. She did not know why Commander Thalrek had chosen this task today of all days. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. No creature, no matter how monstrous, acted without reason. And if she could understand that reason, she might succeed where every alien cadet expected her to fail. The emerald jungle opened slightly as she advanced, the air thick with anticipation. The test had begun. The impossible assignment waited somewhere ahead, breathing, wounded, and misunderstood. Elena moved deeper into the jungle, guided only by instinct and the faint disturbances in the landscape. The humid air clung to her skin, carrying the sharp scent of sap and crushed leaves. She kept her breathing steady, listening to every shift in the environment. The Vorun beast was somewhere ahead, but she did not rush. Instead, she observed how the forest reacted to her presence. Birds with translucent wings circled above her, cawing warnings to one another. Small creatures rustled in the bushes and then fell silent as she passed. The whole forest felt tense, as if it sensed something wounded and unpredictable moving through its heart. A sharp cry suddenly cracked the air from the west. Elena turned her head, recognizing the voice of a cadet from one of the reptilian species. The cry was not one of triumph, but of terror. She changed direction immediately, stepping quickly yet quietly. The cry repeated once more before cutting off, swallowed by the thick jungle. Elena followed the fading echo until she reached a narrow ravine. There she spotted claw marks etched into the rock, deep enough to suggest a large creature had climbed along the wall. Below the ridge lay broken branches and scattered equipment, signs that a cadet had fled in panic. Elena crouched and examined the ground. The soil was freshly disturbed, but not by the heavy gait of a full Vorun. Instead, she saw erratic, unbalanced prints. Something had moved here in a rush, staggering rather than charging. The spacing between the prints suggested hesitation or pain. Elena studied the pattern carefully, tracing a path with her eyes that led toward a series of towering roots twisted into arches. She rose to her feet and pressed forward. The deeper she went, the more signs of chaos she uncovered. A cadet from an avian species clung to a branch high above, trembling while her feathers puffed in distress. She clutched her pack tightly, clearly too frightened to descend. Another cadet dashed past Elena, his face pale and streaked with sweat. He muttered something incoherent about the Vorun's roar shaking the ground. He did not stop long enough for her to reassure him or ask questions. He simply bolted toward the direction of the base, too overwhelmed to think clearly. Elena did not chase him. Panic was contagious, and she refused to let it spread inside her mind. She kept her focus on the subtle details around her, the broken ferns, the shallow grooves where the creature had dragged its paw, the glistening drops of blood on a broad leaf. She touched one of the drops lightly. It was still warm. The Vorun was close. A powerful roar erupted nearby, vibrating through her ribcage. The noise was unlike anything she had heard before, a mixture of fury, fear, and exhaustion. Elena steadied herself against a tree trunk and listened. The roar did not repeat. Instead, she heard labored breathing mixed with occasional grunts. She stepped carefully between two enormous roots and peered into a partially collapsed gorge. A cadet stood on the opposite side of the gorge, shaking visibly. His 4 eyes were wide with terror as he stared at something below. Elena followed his gaze and saw a massive shape moving slowly in the shadows. The cadet noticed Elena and attempted to speak, but his voice cracked under the pressure of his panic. He shouted something about the creature being unstoppable and then stumbled backward, tripping over a vine in his haste to escape. He disappeared between the trees, leaving his discarded equipment behind. Elena remained where she was, not moving closer yet. The shape in the gorge shifted once more. She heard a dull scrape of claws against stone, followed by a pained exhale. She leaned forward to see better, and the light filtering through the canopy revealed a glimpse of the beast's plated shoulder. The armor-like plates were scratched and dull, not gleaming with the usual terrifying strength described in the Academy records. She noticed a faint tremor traveling through the creature's body as it struggled to stand. It managed to lift itself halfway before collapsing again. Elena descended the ravine slowly, choosing each step with care so she would not startle the creature or fall on the loose stones. She kept a low profile, her movements deliberate and quiet. When she reached the ground, she positioned herself behind a thick boulder to observe the scene more clearly. The Vorun's flank rose and fell heavily. Its breaths came in sharp, uneven bursts. It turned its head slightly, revealing a deep gash near its jaw and a cluster of broken thorns embedded in its foreleg. The beast had not attacked any cadet out of malice. It was fighting the pain in its body. A loud snap echoed overhead as a frightened cadet attempted to scale a nearby tree. His claws slipped, and he fell a short distance before catching another branch. His panic intensified, and more branches snapped under his frantic movements. The noise startled the Vorun, and the beast let out a warning growl that resonated through the ravine like a drumbeat. The cadet screamed, lost his grip completely, and landed on a soft growth of moss. He scrambled to his feet and ran blindly, disappearing without looking back. Elena stayed hidden until the forest settled again. The Vorun turned its massive head toward her hiding place, but it did not lunge or snarl. It simply breathed heavily, its eyes half-lidded from exhaustion. She understood then that the creature was not in any condition to fight. It needed rest and relief, not more threats. She emerged from behind the boulder with slow, even steps. She did not reach for anything that could resemble a weapon. Her hands remained open and visible. The Vorun watched her approach, body tense but not aggressive. She stopped several meters away, far enough to avoid provoking it yet close enough to study its injuries. She noticed the blood pooling around its wounded leg and the slight shudder in its chest with every inhale. The ground trembled slightly beneath her feet as the beast tried to shift its weight again. It failed and let out a low, wounded moan. Elena felt the tension in the air change, no longer sharp with fear, but heavy with the creature's suffering. She crouched slowly, placing herself lower in height to avoid appearing confrontational. She did not speak aloud yet. She wanted the Vorun to sense her intentions before she attempted any kind of communication. A few moments passed in heavy silence. The forest seemed to hold its breath as she studied the creature's movements. She realized the thorns embedded in its leg were deep enough to cause significant pain, likely preventing it from moving without agony. The gash near its jaw was still bleeding, but not dangerously. The real issue was the leg. Without help, the creature would not stand again soon, and the other cadets would continue to panic until someone made a foolish mistake. Elena made one final observation. The Vorun's eyes were not filled with rage. Instead, she saw confusion and exhaustion. The creature had roared earlier not to attack, but to ward off threats it could not handle in its weakened condition. She inhaled slowly, letting the damp forest air settle her thoughts. She knew the next move she made would determine everything. The cadets had already scattered, terrified by their own assumptions. But she had discovered something else entirely. The Vorun was not the unstoppable monster described in academy lectures. It was a living being caught in a moment of vulnerability, and she would have to decide how to approach it without triggering the instinctive fear that ruled everyone else in the forest. Elena remained crouched in the ravine, watching every subtle shift in the Vorun's posture. The beast exhaled heavily, sending warm air across the moss-covered ground. Its sides rose and fell in uneven rhythms, each breath carrying the strain of pain that tightened its body. Elena knew she had no time to waste, yet rushing forward without carefully choosing every motion would end with a single fatal swipe of the creature's claws. She steadied her heartbeat and let the quiet of the ravine settle into her thoughts. The surrounding trees stood like towering green pillars, casting long shadows that flickered as insects darted between beams of light. She slowly reached for a large, broad leaf beside her. The leaf drooped under its own weight, but held enough moisture to create a makeshift cup. She collected dew by pressing the leaf against moss-coated stones, letting droplets gather along the curved edges. She kept her movements smooth, avoiding abrupt gestures. The Vorun's eyes followed her hands, but it did not snarl. The creature's breathing remained strained, yet there was no surge of aggression. Elena sensed that it recognized her lack of threat, though she had no illusions. Trust was still far beyond reach. With the leaf cupped carefully in her hands, she took a deliberate step forward. The Vorun reacted with a short, warning rumble from deep within its chest. She stopped immediately, lowering her posture until she knelt on one knee. She offered the leaf forward without leaning closer. Sunlight reflected off the shimmering droplets, creating faint glimmers that drew the creature's attention. The Vorun sniffed the air, its nostrils flaring. For several silent seconds, it remained perfectly still. Finally, it shifted its massive head downward, pressing its snout gently against the ground. It extended its long tongue and touched the leaf's rim. Elena held her breath as the creature drank. She did not move until the Vorun lifted its head again. The beast's gaze lingered on her hands, no longer with full suspicion, but with curiosity, dulled by exhaustion. Encouraged, Elena let the empty leaf fall and reached slowly into her pack. She retrieved several small fruits she had collected earlier, bright green with soft skins and a scent reminiscent of mint. She rolled one across the ground toward the Vorun. The fruit stopped near the creature's paw. It sniffed again, then snapped its jaws lightly around the offering, chewing with audible relief. The taste must have soothed some of its discomfort, because it nudged its nose closer, searching for more. Elena offered 2 additional fruits in the same careful manner, ensuring her hands remained low and open. The Vorun consumed each one without aggression. With the creature calmer, Elena observed the wound more closely. The gash along its jaw was shallow, but the cluster of thorns embedded in its leg was far more severe. The thorns, each as long as her finger, had pierced between scales and were lodged deep enough to cause tremors of pain throughout the beast's frame. She understood she needed to remove them if the creature was ever to stand again. Elena took another slow breath and shifted slightly, leaning just enough to inspect the wound's angle. The Vorun watched her with narrowed eyes, but it did not recoil. She reached into her pack and pulled out a strip of soft cloth she had torn earlier in the day. She wrapped it around her hand to protect her skin from accidental contact with the jagged thorns. Then she pointed toward the injured leg, moving her hand back and forth to show her intention. She kept her voice soft, barely more than a whisper. "It hurts, doesn't it?" she murmured. The creature tilted its head slightly, reacting not to her words, but to the tone she used. Her voice carried gentleness, something the beast had likely never heard from any other cadet. Elena lowered herself further and extended her wrapped hand. The Vorun tensed, pressing its massive claws into the soil, its muscles coiled as if preparing to strike. Elena froze mid-reach, lowering her gaze to show submission. The creature watched her for several long seconds before releasing a shaky breath. Its body relaxed slightly, enough for her to edge closer. She touched the first thorn lightly. The Vorun flinched. She whispered again, soothing and steady, and waited for the creature to settle before gripping the thorn firmly. With a quick, decisive pull, she extracted it. Blood oozed from the puncture, but the relief in the creature's posture was immediate. Its body sagged into the moss with a deep exhale. Elena placed the thorn aside and reached for the next one. This time, the Vorun did not flinch as sharply. Its trust was fragile, but it was growing. Thorn by thorn, Elena worked. Each removal demanded precision, patience, and unwavering calm. Sweat formed at her temples, but she ignored it. She felt the creature's breath on her arms, warm and heavy, yet no gesture hinted at violence. After removing the final thorn, she stepped back slowly to give the beast space. The Vorun attempted to move its injured leg. The first shift brought a groan of pain, but the next motion came easier. Elena noticed how its breathing rhythm changed, still strained, yet less desperate. The beast repositioned itself, resting its wounded limb more comfortably. The forest around them remained strangely quiet, as if every living thing sensed the fragile peace forming between girl and beast. Elena gathered several more fruits and placed them on a large flat rock, sliding them gently toward the Vorun. The creature stretched its neck and consumed each offering with slow, deliberate bites. Its eyes softened, losing the frantic edge that had dominated earlier. Elena understood that the moment was right. She reached into the vines hanging from the ravine wall and began weaving them into long strands. She moistened them with water to soften the fibers and strengthened the binding by twisting several vines together. Her hands worked methodically, creating loops designed to rest gently around the beast's shoulders without restricting movement. She was not building a restraint. She was building a guide, something that communicated partnership rather than captivity. As she worked, the Vorun watched her quietly. When she approached with the woven harness, it did not growl. It simply sniffed the air and remained still. Elena draped the vines over its massive form, adjusting the loops to distribute weight evenly. She whispered softly as she tightened each knot, giving the creature time to adjust to the sensation. When the harness was secured, she stepped back again. The Vorun lifted its head, testing the pull of the vines. Satisfied, it shifted its weight and finally attempted to stand. The movement was shaky, and its first attempt failed. Elena remained motionless, giving the beast the freedom to try again without interference. The second attempt succeeded. The Vorun rose unsteadily, towering above her, its shadow swallowing her figure entirely. But instead of roaring, it lowered its head toward her, touching her shoulder with the rough tip of its snout. Elena released a slow breath. The connection between them no longer felt fragile. It felt real. She placed her hand gently against the side of its neck. The Vorun did not recoil. The next step, guiding it out of the ravine, would require even more trust. But the foundation had been built. And as the sun began to dip behind the dense canopy, Elena knew she had already reshaped the meaning of the assignment. Elena watched the Vorun steady itself on trembling limbs as the fading sunlight painted the ravine in warm amber tones. The creature's massive chest expanded with slow, weary breaths. Although it managed to stand, its wounded leg still quivered under the strain of supporting its own weight. She could not guide it out of the ravine yet. One wrong step on the uneven ground would send it crashing back down. She needed to create a more secure environment, one where its weight could shift comfortably, and where its nerves would settle enough for the journey ahead. She moved carefully around the creature, observing how the vines of the harness draped across its plated shoulders. The vines held well, but she knew the beast needed rest before she attempted to lead it. The sky above darkened as the emerald glow of Veritas Six's moonlight seeped through the treetops. She gathered fallen branches scattered near the ravine walls, selecting only those that were thick enough to support her efforts. She did not intend to build a barrier, merely a small shelter to protect the Vorun from nighttime predators and falling debris that occasionally dropped from the unstable cliffs. The Vorun watched her every movement. Its eyes followed the cadence of her steps, the tilt of her shoulders, the rhythm of her breathing. It no longer regarded her as a threat, yet its instincts remained alert, assessing her intentions with each passing moment. She approached slowly and began placing the sturdy branches into angled positions, leaning them against the ravine wall to form a makeshift canopy. The shelter would shield the creature from the cold drafts descending from the cliffs and from the glowing insects that occasionally drifted too close for comfort. As she worked, she murmured soft, comforting tones, not words meant to instruct or command, but calm noises that blended with the forest's evening hum. The Vorun lowered its head to the moss beneath it, its exhaustion finally pulling it into a state of quiet stillness. Elena continued her task, arranging leaves over the branches to create layered insulation. She understood that the creature needed warmth as much as protection. Wounded beasts were vulnerable not only to predators, but to the chill of Veritas Six's nights, where sudden temperature drops often caught cadets off guard. When the shelter was complete, she gathered more fruit and crushed several leaves into a pulp, creating a natural salve that emitted a faint, soothing aroma. She approached the Vorun slowly, holding the salve in her palms. The creature lifted its head slightly, but did not attempt to retreat. Elena gently pressed the cool mixture onto the edges of the gash near its jaw. The Vorun twitched at first, but when the salve began to take effect, its muscles relaxed. Encouraged, she carefully applied the salve around the puncture marks left by the thorns. The beast's breathing deepened, no longer punctuated by short, pained gasps. With the wounds treated, she stepped back and sat near the creature's side, leaning against a boulder. The air cooled, and nightfall crept in with soft shadows. She reached into her pack and removed a flat stone she had used during past training sessions. She rubbed it against another stone to create a gentle spark, using the dry moss to ignite a small, smokeless flame. Fire was allowed in this environment as long as the flame remained low and controlled. The glow illuminated the ravine, casting gentle flickers across the Vorun's scales. The beast shifted slightly, rolling its uninjured side closer to the warmth. Elena smiled faintly at the small sign of trust. She fed the flame with thin twigs that burned slowly without producing harsh light. She knew bright flames might alarm the creature, so she maintained only enough heat to warm the air around them. She then reached behind the Vorun, touching the vines of its harness to ensure they had not tightened uncomfortably. The creature rumbled in low contentment, a sound far gentler than the aggressive growls it had produced earlier. Hours passed quietly. The night creatures of Veritas Six emerged from hidden burrows. Soft chirps echoed from the canopy. Bioluminescent insects drifted around the ravine, leaving trails of shimmering light in the darkness. The Vorun's eyes followed the glowing patterns overhead, its gaze softened by fatigue and the calming presence beside it. Elena observed the creature's movements, noting how its breathing gradually stabilized. She understood that the bond forming between them was still delicate, yet it had strengthened enough to carry the promise of cooperation. When the Vorun rested its head fully on the ground, Elena leaned closer. She placed her hand softly against the side of its neck, feeling the vibration of its deep breaths through her fingertips. The creature did not flinch. Instead, it allowed her touch to linger. The gesture solidified the fragile trust between girl and beast, a connection rooted not in dominance, but in understanding. As the night deepened, Elena rested her back against the boulder and let her thoughts drift. She considered the behavior of the other cadets. Many of them reacted to the Vorun with instincts shaped by fear and stories. She understood their reasons. Every record described the creature as an unstoppable force. Yet she saw something else in it, something misunderstood. She believed that strength did not always manifest through force. Sometimes it came from patience, empathy, and the willingness to listen. The flame flickered softly as she closed her eyes for a brief moment. She did not allow herself to fall asleep fully, but she let her body relax just enough to conserve energy. A subtle shift in the air alerted her, and she opened her eyes to see the Vorun lifting its head. It nudged her shoulder gently, then settled back down. She realized it had checked on her, a gesture that revealed its growing comfort in her presence. Dawn approached with slow, pale light filtering through the canopy. The ravine warmed again, and birds called out the beginning of a new day. Elena extinguished the last ember of the fire and stood, stretching her stiff limbs. The Vorun rose as well, though its movement still carried residual weakness. She approached it and adjusted the harness again, ensuring no part of the vines pressed painfully against the wounds. The creature lowered its head, allowing her to work, an unspoken acknowledgement of trust. With the shelter dismantled and the path ahead illuminated by morning light, Elena prepared to guide the Vorun out of the ravine. She placed her hand gently against the harness and gave a slight tug. The creature responded, moving its legs carefully across the uneven ground. It leaned into the movement rather than resisting it. Elena stepped forward, matching her pace to the creature's rhythm. Each step brought them closer to the forest's open terrain. Once they reached the edge of the ravine, the Vorun lifted its head toward the sky, as if reclaiming a part of itself lost in pain and fear. Elena stood beside it, feeling a quiet satisfaction settle within her chest. She had not tamed the beast. She had simply shown it that she meant no harm. And in return, the creature had opened a path of trust no cadet had ever walked before. Elena guided the Vorun slowly through the jungle, keeping one hand on the harness and the other free to steady herself against the twisted roots protruding from the soft ground. The morning light shimmered across the beast's plated back, illuminating the vines she had woven. The creature moved with a cautious grace, still burdened by fatigue but no longer trapped by pain. Each step it took was deliberate, as if it feared placing too much weight on its healing leg. Elena matched her pace to its rhythm, never pulling, never forcing. She allowed the creature to choose the exact timing of every motion, letting trust dictate the direction instead of command. The deeper they ventured into the forest, the clearer the distant sounds of cadet voices became. Some voices were panicked, some frustrated, and others exhausted from searching blindly in circles. Elena suspected that the cadets had gathered near the field where the trial began, each one convinced that he or she had failed. She knew none of them expected anyone to return with the beast, let alone guide it peacefully through the terrain. Her goal now was simple: bring the Vorun to the clearing without startling it, and without causing a new wave of fear to erupt among the cadets. The path narrowed as they approached a cluster of massive trees with thick, spiraling trunks. Elena paused, patting the creature's neck gently. She whispered a soft reassurance, though she knew it did not understand the words themselves. The tone mattered more than anything else. The Vorun lowered its head, sniffing the ground, then pushed forward willingly. The sound of snapping branches reached them from ahead. Elena recognized the voices of two cadets arguing quietly about the direction they should search next. She continued forward until the dense foliage parted just enough to reveal the interaction. A tall cadet with pale blue membranes collapsed against a tree trunk, gasping from exertion. Beside him, a shorter cadet with shimmering scales attempted to activate a damaged locator pad. The moment Elena stepped into sight, both froze. Their eyes widened, not at her, but at the massive creature standing behind her. She lifted her hand, signaling silence. The Vorun exhaled sharply, ears twitching at the sudden tension in the air. Elena stepped forward, positioning herself between the beast and the two cadets. "It is all right," she said, her voice steady. "Move slowly. No sudden movements." The cadets remained frozen in place, too shocked to respond. The Vorun sniffed the air and then lowered its head peacefully. Its muscles relaxed. Elena took advantage of the moment and guided the creature around the cadets, giving them space. As she led the Vorun past them, she caught a glimpse of pure disbelief in their faces. No training record could have prepared them for such a sight. Elena pressed forward, determined to avoid gathering too much attention before reaching the clearing. When she finally stepped out of the jungle's shadow, the full camp came into view. Cadets clustered in small groups, each one visibly exhausted. Some slumped against supply crates, while others paced anxiously or argued about search strategies. Instructors stood at the center of the clearing, evaluating the reports brought in by scattered cadets. Commander Thalrek examined a holographic map, marking the locations of failed attempts. The moment the clearing fell silent, Elena realized someone had already seen her. Several cadets turned their heads abruptly, confusion flickering across their expressions. Others stared with disbelief, their voices turning into whispers that quickly spread. Commander Thalrek lifted his head, his spines rising in instinctive anticipation. His gaze landed on Elena, and for a moment he remained still, unsure whether the scene before him was a hallucination or reality. Elena continued forward until she stood at the edge of the clearing. The Vorun halted beside her, towering above the assembled cadets, yet emanating no aggression. Sunlight glinted off its plates as it shifted its weight and leaned slightly toward her. The clearing remained silent, stunned by the sheer impossibility of what unfolded before their eyes. Commander Thalrek stepped forward slowly, studying the creature with an expression that blended awe with confusion. "You guided it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked at Elena, then at the harness, then back at her face. "How?" Before she could answer, one of the instructors muttered, "This should not be possible." Another shook his head, staring at the Vorun's calm posture. "It should be attacking. It should be thrashing." Elena placed her hand gently on the creature's neck. "It needed help," she said simply. "Once it understood I was not a threat, it allowed me to approach." A wave of murmurs swept through the cadets. Some expressed disbelief. Others watched with admiration. A few stared in quiet embarrassment, remembering how fear had driven them to flee without attempting to understand the situation. Commander Thalrek stepped closer, carefully inspecting the vines of the harness and the healed wound on the beast's leg. He studied Elena with a depth of focus she had not seen in any previous trial. "You did more than capture it," he said at last. "You earned its trust." His voice carried a new tone, respect, tempered with surprise. "No cadet has ever managed such a thing." The Vorun lowered its massive head toward Elena's shoulder and nudged her gently. Several cadets gasped as the gesture revealed the extent of the bond she had formed with the creature. Elena touched its snout lightly, acknowledging the connection. Commander Thalrek straightened and turned to the assembled group. "This trial was designed to challenge your instincts," he said, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "Many of you relied on fear, some relied on brute force, but one cadet saw beyond the surface. One cadet chose understanding over confrontation." He gestured toward Elena. "Let this be a lesson. Strength is not always found in domination. Sometimes it is found in compassion." The cadets listened in thoughtful silence, some bowing their heads, others absorbing the unexpected wisdom of the moment. Elena exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the journey settle into her chest. She glanced at the Vorun, who now stood peacefully beside her, as if she had always been part of its world. She knew this moment would be remembered in the Academy's history, not because she had succeeded, but because she had changed the meaning of success. The instructors stepped aside, allowing Elena and the Vorun to stand in the center of the clearing. Sunlight shimmered along the creature's armor as it breathed calmly in the presence of those who once feared it. Elena felt a quiet sense of fulfillment rise within her. She had guided the beast home, not as a trophy, but as a living being who deserved understanding. As the wind stirred the leaves above, Elena realized something else. The trial had not been about strength or cunning. It had been about the courage to see the world differently. And in that difference, she had found a path no one else had dared to walk. The Vorun lowered its head once more, signaling a silent farewell. Elena stepped back, releasing the gentle tension in the harness. The creature turned and disappeared into the forest with steady, confident steps. She watched it until its massive figure faded into the emerald shadows. The clearing remained quiet. Commander Thalrek looked at Elena with a rare softness in his stern expression. "You have redefined what this academy believed was possible," he said. Elena nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle within her. The trial was complete. The lesson was learned. And the bond she had forged, rooted in patience, kindness, and courage, had transformed the impossible into reality. The day ended with a quiet certainty. She had not conquered the beast. She had